Hello, and welcome to this edition of Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm Councilmember Helen Rosenthal, and I represent the Upper West Side in the New York City Council. Today we'll be talking about the property tax system here in New York City and how it affects homeowners. Many people think that their taxes are too high. I know I'm one of them. And New York City apparently has one of the largest disparities in residential tax rates in the country. A recent analysis of residential tax rates in New York has found that higher tax rates are disproportionately associated with properties belonging to low-income and minority residents, while many of the city's more affluent residents have lower tax rates. There's also evidence that apartment owners pay a higher rate than owners of 1, 2, and 3 family homes. Today we'll be discussing the root of the problem and how a wide-ranging coalition of activists is trying to change the system. This includes a lawsuit which has been filed against the City of New York. Joining me today to discuss this topic further is the Honorable Judge Jonathan Lippman, former Chief Judge of the State of New York Court of Appeals, New York's highest court. Judge Lippman is now of counsel with Latham and Watkins, LLP. We are also joined by Martha E. Stark, Policy Director for Tax Equity Now New York and Professor at the NYU Wagner School of Public Affairs. Ms. Stark served as New York City Finance Commissioner under Mayor Michael Bloomberg. Thank you very much for being here today. May I call you Judge? And Martha, that is truly the longest introduction of titles that I've ever done on Represent NYC. Thank you so much for being here. This is an incredibly important issue. Judge, if you could start. The property tax system is maddeningly complicated. I know for me as a taxpayer, and even on the budget negotiating team in the council, when we review the percent increases that we could possibly adjust, could you start by breaking it down for us, describe the status quo, and give us some context?
Yeah. Well, you know, the Court of Appeals in 1975 said that property should be, the taxes should be based on the full value of what the property is worth. In 1981, the legislature tried to take what the court said and put it into a statutory form, and even at that time, the governor vetoed what they did, but they went further and actually did it, saying that while the Court of Appeals says it should be full market value, they were going to do a fractional assessment of what the property is worth and base taxes on that. Ever since then, there have been a series of Band-Aids put on this problem by the state legislature, really trying to attract different groups with either voting power or resources that might find the particular structure of taxes in New York City to be attractive. And this has resulted over the years, because of the state legislation and the city's failure to take action, this has developed into a system that has vast disparities. The law is simple. The law says like property should be treated the same, that the tax that you pay should have a relationship to the value of the property, and it shouldn't matter whether you live in one neighborhood or another. In fact, the taxes, the real estate taxes that you pay, have no relationship or virtually no relationship to the value of the property. Number two, there are vast disparity within property classes and between classes that have just had a system that we believe, and this lawsuit lays out quite clearly, is discriminatory against minorities, against less affluent neighborhoods, against renters, in a way that just is absolutely arbitrary. So the lawsuit that we brought says that the present property tax structure violates New York state Constitution, the real property tax law, the due process and equal protection clauses of the state and federal Constitution, and the Fair Housing Act, the Federal Fair Housing Act, actually promoting segregation within the city of New York. So on every level, and we'll get into during this conversation, some of the examples between homeowners, renters versus homeowners, renters versus condominium and co-op owners. There are all kinds of disparities, inequities, and we believe that it is up to the state and the city to fix this problem, to, in good faith, come at it and say, we're all about, I spent my entire life trying to promote fairness in the justice system. To me, the long and the short of it is that the system that we have now is not fair. And that's the bottom line.
And that's just where we are now. I mean, as a result of, a variety of historic reasons
Yes.
and whatever, here's where we are now.
40 years of fumbling around with
That's
this,
right.
with everyone saying it's inequitable, it's discriminatory, but no one really takes it up to fix it and make it better.
That was a great description. I actually now perhaps understand it. So thank you for that. I'm wondering, Martha, you had been the finance commissioner, so you've looked at this stuff, you know the ins and outs. What's so interesting about what the judge raises is that how could you have equality if by definition New York City is segregated by geography?
So it's an interesting question. I just wanted to sort of piggyback on something that the judge said, which is to say that it's 40 years in the making and that the city has changed dramatically in 40 years. So that's another reason why it's high time for us to take a look at the property tax system and figure out whether or not it is the best property tax system for our city today, given sort of the types of properties and all of the important government services that we need to sort of support. So your question about the property tax doesn't in and of itself discriminate. I mean, it's a really pretty simple sort of thing, as the judge said. If I own a property that's worth $500,000, I should be liable for the same tax as someone else who has a property that's worth $500,000. And so it is absolutely true that there are some neighborhoods where $500,000 might be the average. There are other neighborhoods where $2 million might be the average. If I have a $500,000 property, I think the $2 million property should pay 4 times what my taxes are, at least be liable for 4 times what my taxes are. That is not the current system. And in fact, the court decision that the judge referred to, actually the dissent in that opinion, or it might have been, sort of one of the, said, one of the reasons why you don't do assessments at a fraction is, many people hate math. And so if you don't start with, I think your value, council member, is $750,000. And then you can have a discussion of, is that right or is it not right? But if you say to me, take 750 and multiply by 6%, and then, by the way, then multiply by a tax rate that's different, everybody kind of gets lost after the multiply by 6%. It's not even multiply by 10%, it's 6%. And
Right.
that's a problem. We want people to actually understand their taxes and be able to judge whether or not it's fair or it's not fair. And that's not what the current system does.
And then when on top of that, you have artificial constraints put into the system, like the state law that says that your assessment can't be raised more than 6% in any year, then certain areas are becoming gentrified, where the values are going way up, and other areas are not, and yet there's the same cap on the increase of assessments. Without the city taking action, the state law is what created it, but without the city taking action, this is a complex area, basically adjusting the assessment ratio to end the disparities or to eliminate the disparities. You're going to have a cockeyed system where one person in one part of the county could pay 400% more for a property that they paid the same amount for in the same year, in that same county, and yet one pays 400% for basically the same property. And again, it's a system that has artificial Band-Aids, and yet no one does the things necessary to eliminate the disparities caused by that kind of legislation. And this could be corrected by legislation or by action within the city. In fact, Martha, as the finance commissioner, could tell you certain steps that could be done today that would really change a lot of those inequities. Martha?
Yeah.
Do you want to give an example?
Absolutely. So one sort of example, which is within the homeowner class, and we didn't say to your sort of listeners, there are 4 tax classes, and so each kind of type of property is broken into those 4 tax classes. Just briefly, the tax class 1 is 1, 2, and 3 family homes. Tax class 2 is all other residential, so apartment buildings, co-ops, and condos. 3 is utility property, which few people care about except they pass it on directly to you dollar for dollar. And then class 4 is kind of like catch-all everything else, but that's where office buildings are, as well as warehouses and factories. This theater is likely in class 4. And so just if we would for a minute just talk about class 1, and I actually think one of the really hidden inequities that we don't discuss very much is within the apartment building class, because as the judge pointed out, there are the way that you value actually co-ops and condos, so really wonderful co-ops and condos on the Upper West Side, or I live in Park Slope in a co-op and condo. The way that we actually value that is that we have to find comparable rental properties. So you estimate a rental income for a $30 million co-op or condo that sells, and what happens is it results in a value that makes absolutely no sense.
You compare it to rent-stabilized apartments.
Right.
Well,
if it was
that
done
too.
under rent regulation,
For a multi-million-dollar co-op.
And I can't tell you how many constituents who are president of their co-op board come in with this exact complaint.
absolutely, first of all, no one understands it. Because if you said to that $30 million, sort of owner, oh, by the way, do you know that finance only has a value of $400,000 on your $30 million? They feel like they are being treated badly, and yet there are other, owners who are really getting treated badly. So I tell this, kind of quick story about my co-op, which I happened to buy in 1984 for $90,000.
Now
This
we're just
year,
all going to be envious. So
this
go ahead.
year, and it's in Park Slope, it's a pretty great neighborhood. This year, finance's market value on my co-op is still less than $90,000. That's how undervalued are the co-ops. And so everybody feels like they're overtaxed. I'm not telling you that my taxes are not high, but my value bears no relation to what I think I should pay. And the effect of that is that rental property owners pick up the difference. They pick up the slack. And so, if no one leaves with anything else today, renters, you pay property taxes through your rent. And in many neighborhoods across the city, the amount is as much as a third, some instances 40% of your rent is actually going to pay property taxes. It's one of these areas where we all need to be aware of it as we want more affordable housing. We want to make sure that rents are, people can afford to live and stay in the city. The amount of rent that's going to property taxes is significant.
And they are literally footing the bill for the multi-million-dollar co-ops and condos. It's astounding.
So I was just going to ask you the question. Is it clear who the winners and losers would be in a property tax reform?
Well, we haven't, in the lawsuit, we have not said how you fix it, because we want the coalition of groups and people who have brought this lawsuit to help shape it, and the members of the city council and renters and homeowners and the civil rights groups that we have, the NAACP, the Black Institute, Latino Justice, all of the different groups of the city, real estate leaders. We want everyone to come together and figure out how to make it fairer. We know today that in general, lower income people, minorities, renters, certain sections of the city are losers. We understand that. But we want to create a coalition that can come together and say, how can we make it fair and yet recognize that maybe you have to build into the system some protections, maybe for people who have been there for many years, maybe for older people, whatever the standard is. But it can't be totally arbitrary as it is now and totally unfair, discriminatory, and it actually keeps people in poorer minority neighborhoods because you're paying such a high tax that you can't afford to go to another section of the city and live there. And by the same token, people are in these low-taxed areas, generally non-minorities, aren't going to move either, because why would they leave the area they're in? So it promotes this almost a segregated city in certain regards.
You know, what I like so much about the idea of the lawsuit is that if it were to go through, and let's say a judge were to say, you must fix this, and there were some sort of parameters, I'm not a lawyer, so...
And that's exactly what would happen.
Right.
The judge would give them parameters to fix it.
That's right. Wouldn't that be the opportunity to take the politics out of it? Whenever
Absolutely.
we talk about it in the budget negotiating team in the council, there's always this element of people sort of, you know, from Brooklyn and from Queens sort of laughing at me as a Manhattan representative.
That's what got us into this problem.
Right.
Everyone's looking at their own
Borough.
voting constituency, and you
there are
can't
more
fix it that way.
politicians. They're just flat on more politicians because the population's bigger
Yeah.
there.
Oh, and I think, look, you know, when you bring together sort of minds who say, you know, what really is in the best interest of the city, and I think that's what our coalition is trying to sort of talk about. What's in the best interest of the city? And so might I end up, you know, as a co-op owner in Parksville paying more? Yes, I might. And if I do, if we have the best tax system that our country can offer, because people know what their values are, they certainly feel like they're being treated fairly compared to others, that's a better system, even if it means at the end of the day I pay more. And I think that you're right that what happens is if you're, you know, looking at a little list in your politics, then you forget about the sort of greater good and the sort of best interest of the city at large. And so a judge or a court, that's why we have that third branch of government, is that it allows you to take some of the politics out of it and say, here are the broad principles that a great property tax system should have, and articulate what those principles are, and then we have people around the table who represent different interests and can actually bring those to bear.
And that's why the political system hasn't fixed it for 40
Yeah.
years. And this is the way democracy works. If you feel that government is doing something that's illegal, that's unconstitutional, then you're aggrieved, and you should go to the independent third branch of government who maybe could say to the other two more political branches, listen, you have to fix it. And as you say, these are the principles that go towards fixing it. You decide,
Yeah.
but we're going to point you in the right direction.
And could the courts also set up a monitor or a task
Sure.
force
All of
and
the above.
require who would be on the task force and that it would be binding?
Yes, the court could do all of that. And our point is, rather than fighting this, doesn't it make more sense for the government to say, we want to fix it, we want to make it better? How do we come together to do that? Rather than saying, oh, it's a lawsuit, gee, we're not pointing fingers at any particular person or group. We're saying it cannot be this arbitrary, just completely senseless system where no one has any idea why they pay the particular property tax that they do.
And could we just dive for 1 second into the assessment part?
Sure.
And so what happens is that people are hired by the city to go around and do assessments. How does that work? What are they looking for? I mean, at the end of the day, isn't your apartment or building or home valued at whatever the market?
So it's a really good question. I mean, you know, hired and they go around. Essentially, you know, there's a team of assessors, and actually assessing has become a lot more interesting. I mean, it was always, for me, always very interesting, but a lot more interesting now because you can actually virtually assess, right? I'm on Property Shark all the time. You get a lot of data and stuff. Essentially, what the assessors are doing is exactly what you and I would do if we were going to buy a piece of property. They're trying to figure out what the value of that property is, and basically appraisers allow 3 different theories. You can use sales price, best indicator. If Judge Lippman bought a property in my building, what his property he purchased it for, I could then say, great, I only have 105 shares, he has 1,000. And so mine is worth a fraction of that, right? So that's one approach. And it is the approach that actually the department uses for 1, 2, and 3 family homes. For the other properties, I'll leave out utilities for a moment. Essentially what they're doing is figuring out what the income is that that property can generate. So if you were an office building, how much would it generate in income? And then they capitalize that. The goal is still to try to get at what the sales price might be, but that's an approach that's actually allowed. And what's interesting, again, what the judge said is that that's the approach that's used for co-ops and condos, and it does not make sense to use that for co-ops and condos today. And at the time, you know, there were only 100,000 co-op and condo units, actually very small number of condo units, but they also were formerly rentals, so it kind of made a little bit of sense. But now you're building a building with $30 million, $40 million condos, it does not make sense to try to figure out how to value them based on
how many co-ops and condos are there?
There's about 550,000 co-op and condo units. It's a very different world than it was at the time. So.
Does rent, so talk again about how buildings owned by building owners who have some rent regulated and some market rate. Does that building owner take advantage of, have a lower property tax rate?
I mean, again, the finance department in this regard, they get income information from the building, and so if there's a blend, they'll have what the total income is in the building, and that's what they'll be capitalizing. And so,
does it incentivize a building owner to keep rent-regulated apartments in any way?
I'm not going to step into rent regulated and what owners get incentivized to do. I will say one thing, that the current property tax system penalizes you if you do renovations. And so what I do believe is that we might want to take a look at whether or not that's something you want to, you know, sort of address. So if your taxes go up much more if you renovate, then it's certainly not going to lead any owners, whether it's homeowners or others, to even report that they're renovating, because you know, their taxes will go up and it raises all kinds of safety issues.
What's particularly unusual and strange when we talked about the co-op condos and how it's compared to whatever, it's only for certain co-op condos. Those before 1974 are compared to you know, rent-regulated apartments in this income calculation method that Martha was talking about. So it's bizarre peculiarities in the law that make it, by the time you finish, people's heads are spinning because they just cannot understand. And the result is, within classes, there are inequities. Again, we gave the example of the homeowner who paid the same price and pays so much more taxes. You could have a home, for instance, in Carroll Gardens, where in Brooklyn, let's say, where the home is worth $8 million. That person might pay the same amount of real estate taxes as a person who has a $150,000 house in Crown Heights. So that's within a class, and then between classes, you know, within people, 2 different categories, renters, co-ops, and condos, and then between classes, you have a certain amount of value, and you pay a certain amount of property taxes each class, and it's totally all over the place and just makes no sense. Arbitrary, I think, is the best word to describe this haphazard system that we have.
Right. I'm already overwhelmed. What are we missing that you'd like to bring up that we haven't asked about yet? What's the pushback you're getting?
So far, we've met with a lot of people, and I will concede everybody believes the system is broken. Everyone. There's not anyone who's said, this is a fantastic system, I can't believe you're challenging it in a lawsuit. Everyone believes the system is broken. Everyone has an idea about, you know, well, maybe we should be worried about X, Y, and Z, and so the priorities of what most people are focused on is a little bit different, but no one is sort of surprised. We get a lot of positive feedback about, you know, bringing the lawsuit and also trying to actually address this issue. The city's property tax raises a significant significant amount of money for the city. It is the largest source of revenue for the city. It's important that that be done in a way that's really fair and equitable to everyone. It pays for far too important government
and our proposal
services.
is revenue neutral.
Yeah.
But I mean, you could do
Yeah.
various things to raise it, lower it. Ours is revenue neutral, and the only pushback I think that we've seen is this idea of bringing the lawsuit. This is not the way democracy works. Let the political branches solve it. And our answer is, this is the way democracy works. And it's 40 years that this illegal, discriminatory system has existed. Let's do something together now to fix it, to make it, as Martha says, fair for everyone to see. Not perfect, it's never going to be perfect. But certainly there should be this great attempt to make it equitable for everybody who lives in this city.
Let's face it, when we're talking about issues of race and class,
Absolutely.
you know, there have always been problems, and it's always been easy to say next year.
Right.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah,
look
exactly.
harder at the numbers and study everything,
Exactly.
you know, down the road. And what you're saying is, we've done the numbers.
Right.
We've done the analysis. Now is the time.
Let's seize the opportunity, is what's saying. What an opportunity to make things better
Yeah.
in the city. Than
Yeah,
this.
sign me on.
Okay.
You're in.
Yeah. Where are we in, Judge, where are we in the court
The
process?
the
How does that-
lawsuit has been brought in New York Supreme Court in Manhattan. The city has made, again, apropos our saying, let's fix it, let's not play these games, has made a motion to dismiss the lawsuit.
Okay.
We will be submitting our answer towards the end of August, and then the judge will probably hold a hearing or an argument about it. And we expect sometime in September, maybe late September, maybe we could get a decision. And hopefully, at least from the perspective of the coalition, we hope the judge will opine a little bit about what this is all about. We're certainly quite confident the motion to dismiss will be denied, but maybe the judge can say, you know what, there's a real issue here that has to be addressed. That's our hope.
And for people who are watching, what can they do if they want to learn more or if they want to get engaged?
It's a great question. Thank you for it. So we have a website, taxequity.ny.com, so people can visit that website. You can actually punch in your own address, and it actually feeds you back information about what your taxes are, as well as how those sort of taxes compare to others around the city.
And
so
if you meet
it's
Martha
a really
on the street, she'll take out a computer and she can do it for you. Any property of the city of New York.
He's telling the truth because he's a judge. He always tells the truth. In any event, yeah. So visit the website if you have any questions. You know, you can contact us. You can join the coalition. You can say, click on the website and say we want to be a part of Tax Equity Now New York. It's really an important issue for all of us. I fell in love with the property tax because it touches everyone's life in some way, shape, and form, whether you're a renter, or you're an owner, or anything. It really matters, and it is what helps us pay for our teachers and our police and firefighters. It's
What a
important.
wonderful note to end this on. Oh my goodness. So unfortunately, it's time for us to wrap up. I've learned so much. I'm sure our viewers have learned so much as well. I really want to thank both of my guests today on behalf of the residents of New York City. We greatly appreciate your time and insight. Thank you for watching Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Goodbye.